Awesome. Let me make sure we are live on Substack. Where is my video here? Awesome.
Is there anything on Restream that allows us to see how many people are?
So I got it pulled up on Substack over here. We got 50 people. So they're
well, hi everyone.
Yeah.
Joe, should you tell why don't you tell them why we're here and what the hell we're doing?
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks everybody for being here. Today we're gonna be talking to our senior international Joe Rogan correspondent, Luke Savage. He's gonna give us a rundown of how is centrism performing in other countries, specifically in the United Kingdom, America's big brother. So Luke, let's start right there. You wrote this piece yesterday, I believe. Is this the future liberals want? Looking into how centrism is working for the British Labour Party, specifically Prime Minister Keir Starmer. So let's start super simple. What is Starmerism? What is the British government up to at this time?
The British government, I'll take that part of the question first. They're doing great. Everybody loves them. The Prime Minister himself is immensely popular, wildly popular. People are actually getting sick of winning, I hear. Well, where to begin with the question of what is Starmerism? I mean, honestly, it's kind of a difficult question to answer because there really is just so little there. I mean, Keir Starmer himself is nominally a figure from what's called the soft left of the Labour Party. He was actually during the Corbyn era. He was part of the shadow cabinet. He was one of the architects of the disastrous Brexit strategy, which helped cost Labour the 2019 election. He's just kind of been a political chameleon throughout his career. I really think on a personal level, he is not somebody who has any strong beliefs about anything or sharp edges of any kind. There are centrist ideologues from in the 1990s, there were actual centrist ideologues who believed in something. What they believed in was bad, but there was actually something tangible you could grab a hold of. I don't think Starmer is like that. And Starmerism is a similarly kind of amorphous phenomenon. After Corbyn's defeat, Starmer was able to win the Labour leadership by pledging a lot of continuity with the Corbyn era. His campaign, he had the 10 pledges, and there are things like economic justice, increasing top income tax on top 5% of earners, promote migrants' rights, common ownership, public services should be in public hands, not making profits for shareholders, strengthen workers' rights and trade unions, radical devolution of wealth, power, and opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how he won and how he beat the kind of explicitly Corbynite candidate, Rebecca Long Bailey. But pretty much as soon as he won the Labour leadership, he started pivoting to the right. And, there's been a clique around Starmer that, since he assumed the leadership, that doesn't really come from the soft left. It comes from the Labour right. Peter Mandelson, who's people may have seen, has been in the news recently, had a lot of influence in this government. And he was one of the architects of Blairism in the 1990s. So Starmerism finds kind of the only clarity it really has in attacking and purging the left and repudiating the left. It's never been very popular. Starmer won a landslide, parliamentary landslide in 2024 of, I think, 175 seats, which, to put that in perspective, it's like 411 out of 650 seats. So the majority is 175. Tony Blair's landslide in 1997 was 171 majority. And I think Starmer's seat count was bigger than Clement Attlee's as well in 1945. So it's a huge parliamentary majority, won on about 33.7% of the popular vote on record low voter turnout. So Starmerism, when it takes power, is not very popular. It's a landslide, but it's a landslide that nobody, like a record low number of people voted for. And then, this is all just over the last 18 months or so now. Starmer used this massive majority to do a whole bunch of really unpopular things that people hated. And I mean, I could run through the list. We'd be here all day, but just to name a few of them, I mean, one of the first things they did was cut this winter fuel allowance payment, which is basically like it's a top up to deal with the cost of energy. If like anyone's been to Britain, like Britain is not, you're in Denver, I'm in Toronto, so it gets a lot colder here. But because it's cold here, the buildings tend to be pretty well insulated. On the other hand, I've been colder in Britain than I ever have in Canada, because like the buildings are ancient and they're not insulated. So like old people, pensioners, do sometimes die in the winter. And one of the first things Starmer did during his honeymoon period was cut this winter fuel allowance, because apparently not enough senior citizens were freezing to death in the winter. There were reversals on like supporting trans people. Basically the government adopted J.K. Rowling's gender policies.
Mm-hmm.
Parts of the treasury, parts of the state were handed over to BlackRock. Starmer gave a speech where he talked about how Britain was becoming an island of strangers, which was a direct quote, direct paraphrasing of famous speech, Rivers of Blood, by the far-right politician Enoch Powell. I mean, so it's been a very, very right-wing government, and it's been a calamity. It's been a disaster. Yeah. Starmer is actually personally less popular than Liz Truss, who lasted 5 weeks in office or something. So there's a lot more that could be said, but this government was unpopular and it was failing before any of the recent revelations having to do with Jeffrey Epstein or Peter Mandelson or anything like that.
Yeah. I want to hit on what you just said there about less popular than Liz Truss. So I'm going to share my screen here. This is from your article, which I highly suggest people go check out. I really appreciated it. But I really like this graph right here, right? Because we can see, and I think it's kind of interesting, I'd love to hear you talk more about this, of those 10 pledges you talked about what he ran on, sound to me further to the left than what his government actually is, right? So
I would say so.
Yeah. And we can kind of see here, right? Like, okay, he's got a little bit above water when he starts his term. And as this government goes from, hey, these are these 10 pledges where we're going to help you live, common ownership, workers' rights, right? More towards purging the left, cutting that fuel subsidy, right? He's getting less and less popular. I will always say Liz Truss just going straight down for 2 months. Like, I laughed out loud when I saw this, because what was the thing someone did? Will she last longer than a head of cabbage, was it? And they saw, yeah, right. So,
and the cabbage won.
Cabbage won, yeah. And Starmer versus cabbage, he might have lasted longer, but it looks like he's less popular than moldy cabbage, right?
Yeah.
So why do you think it is? Because we see this in the United States too, right? Where when Democrats run, they always kind of talk about like protecting Social Security, workers' rights, unions, stuff like that. And then they never bring it in to their actual government. So what do you think it says about centrism that they can't really run on, what they're actually going to do? Cutting subsidies for the poor, attacking the left, and why they have to kind of sound a little bit like progressives to even get elected into office.
Sure. I should clarify, the 10 pledges were, Starmer ran on those during his leadership campaign in 2020. So the actual Labour platform was already significantly to the right of those. And since forming government, Starmer has abandoned even some of the things that were half decent on that platform. But to get to the question, I think centrism, whether we're talking about the Starmer government, whether we're talking about its U.S. proxies and equivalents, I think it is primarily responsive to and trying to appease, to borrow from the sage Ezra Klein here, the groups Like the thing about the whole groups thesis is it's actually kind of true. It's just the people who say it, like they're pointing fingers at the wrong groups. Like so much of Starmerism has been about trying to impress a very small, uh, cosmos of lobby journalists and pundits. It's been about trying to, appease the financial markets or kind of like demonstrate fiscal competency to the financial markets. I mean, the winter fuel allowance cut was justified by the Chancellor Rachel Reeves on the grounds that well, like we have to save money because we have to maintain market confidence, right? So there are all these groups that in popular or democratic terms don't represent like a large mass of the electorate. um but centrists are convinced that, well, if you just make these people happy, if you just make these institutions happy, like somehow popularity, like actual popularity, will follow down the road. And I think the second thing, which is also very applicable in the U.S. context, if we're talking about, I know we're going to talk about your piece on Kamala Harris and your recent dust up with my dad's Jonathan Chait and Adam Gentleson, but I think the other big problem here with centrism is just inauthenticity, right? Um, Obviously, lots of voters don't have finely tuned ideological antennae, right? They don't always know where they sit on a left right spectrum or something like that. But usually for good reason, or often for good reason, they have a sort of ingrained distrust of the political class. And one thing they do pick up on is inauthenticity, right? People can tell if they're being lied to, they can tell if they're being bullshitted. So when you have a figure like Starmer, who's was part of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet, sort of gained prominence in the Labour Party through this left-wing insurgent project or on its coattails, and then pivots sharply to the right. Yeah, there's no there, and I think people can sense that, and it's a big problem for American Democrats as well.
Yeah, I think my kind of takeaway from one of my takeaways from the 2024 election was like Americans might not have like, the typical political education that is common with, reporters, journalists, whoever. Not because they're stupid, just because they're not really focusing on politics all the time. They got normal people shit going on. But they have a much higher bullshit sensor than politicians think they do. I also think there's an element of that. If you live in Washington, D.C., everyone is always angling for something. Everybody's constantly bullshitting each other. And they kind of live in this echo chamber where they think that that's how other people do it and that other people will put up with a sense of bullshit. And this was something we really tried to get across with the genocide in Gaza, right? You could roll out all these things saying like, oh, Israel is defending itself. There was actually a secret base under that kindergarten, so we had to bomb it and stuff like that. People are looking at their phones and they're seeing, kids being burned alive by American bombs. Your lies aren't convincing them. They're just showing you that you're a liar who is going to lie to them. And so they're not going to trust you on anything else. And I tried to make this point when I was talking to Jonathan Chait on Twitter, where, he says, well, actually, Kamala was too progressive, right? And my point was like, you can argue she was too progressive, too moderate, whatever you want. It is undeniable that she came from Jonathan Chait's, faction of the Democratic Party. So you have to answer for me why, if you gave us this candidate who, whatever you want to call her, lost and also lost the House of Representatives and the Senate, why we should trust you to do it again. And that's the thing that I really want to get to these centrists, where it's like, putting aside policy, everyone knows that you're full of shit. And I don't see an answer for how centrism is going to deal with this. And so that's where I kind of want to talk a little bit about, flipping back and forth between your other pieces, right? You did this kind of review of Kamala's 107 days book tour. And your kind of takeaway here, correct me if I'm misreading this, is that, she's too focused on the flash. She's really obsessed with saying like, I got the biggest applause on Saturday Night Live, right? And stuff like that. So I'm kind of curious, where do you think this focus from these types of politicians come from? Where you're not saying like, she's almost bragging in this book like she won the election, and she didn't win the election, but she's still saying like, well, John Bon Jovi performed for me, so that's like evidence I should run again, as we all know she's about to.
Yeah, I mean, the memoir is really fascinating. In how much time she spends talking about, yeah, like crowds, and I mean as one writer put it, Nesrine Malik in the Guardian, the immersion in the filmic and the celluloid of U.S. politics. Like instead of talking about her position on Gaza substantively, she'll quote, a Washington Post staff writer's take on her approach. And like, I think the quote was something like, and behold, she had her boat through the impossible straits, and it's like, so she just like finds somebody who's praising her triangulation, like she's cribbing from the reception section of a Wikipedia article for a movie or something like that. And instead of talking about the thing, she's talking about like the reception of the thing. And I think this is a really big problem with like this to me is a more specific pathology of like US centrism and the right wing of the Democratic Party, because like there is this absolute obsession with spectacle and celebrity and meta narrative. And I think the Kamala Harris campaign was such an incredible demonstration of that. And we were talking off mic before we started the stream about this campaign where she was the Democrats were saying like, elect us or we're going to have like the Fourth Reich in America. And then while they're saying that is what's at stake, they're spending tens of millions of dollars essentially to hold concerts around the United States, which doesn't really bespeak like moral seriousness or moral urgency. In terms of what the campaign was actually trying to do, though, it seems to me it was like a pretty transparent attempt to reverse engineer Obama 2008, because I don't think a lot of Democratic strategists and operatives really, like, including those who were there, I don't think they really understand Obama's appeal or why he won in 2008. Like, they look at all the celebrity buzz around Obama. They look at Oprah Winfrey endorsing Obama, which was, pretty significant at the time. They look at all of the celebrities. I still remember I was in my first year of university on election night watching CNN, and they had a hologram of Andre 3000 from Outkast talking to Anderson Cooper. And it was like, wow, we really are in politics 2.0. Look at this. He's got the celebs on side. But the thing is, all of that was down. That was real. That buzz was real, which, paying like Beyonce $1 million to do a concert for you is less real than that. But
I don't think Beyonce even played. If I remember correctly, I don't think she played. I can look that up. I think she just said something and walked off, which gets your
they spent $1 million to
yeah.
get Beyonce to say something. Good grief!
Yeah.
But like the point is, in Obama in 2008, all of that stuff around Obama was downstream from what people wrongly it turned out, but as it turned out, but what people thought Obama was, which was like an insurgent, anti-Wall Street candidate who was going to be, who's going to usher in a populist realignment, who was going to be a kind of second FDR. He had been against the Iraq War, which was a hugely significant issue in 2008, and probably the main reason he was able to defeat Hillary Clinton. And that's why I would argue all that buzz existed. And instead of that being the takeaway for these people was celebrities liked Obama, and then all these crowds kind of just like magically sprung up. Like, they think that popular support is downstream from spectacle and celebrity, and that's just not true.
I also think all that comes from, and some of the stuff we talked about earlier, like, they actually do think that voters are stupid, and they're like, well, if we can just wave Beyonce in front of their face, of course we're going to win, right? And I think that's like a big part of like the more time I spend in politics, the more I realize the conception that like politics is for smart people and only smart people talk about politics. Man, I've interacted with some people who like you could would not know that 2 + 2 = 4, and they're in like pretty high political positions. So if you're listening to
Right.
this, kill that idea in your head because it's not true.
This is a really important point to underscore. I think you're absolutely right. Centrists, like, and you know, the elite wonk brigade, and like all of these people we're talking about, they really do have contempt for like most people. Like they think that they think most voters are dumb and apolitical and like don't have any sense of like their own desires or needs or wants, and like basically you win them over by like jangling some shiny keys in their faces or something. It's like you've seen this in the way that some of these people tried to process Mamdani's win, where they're like, oh well, it's just like you just have to get a cool guy, like you just get a cool guy who like
On TikTok.
uh who's positive, and he's on TikTok, and
Yeah.
and he goes on podcasts, and like that's what they think, because they cannot understand that you can appeal to people with ideology. You can appeal to people by like speaking directly to their lived experiences and their needs. Like they don't want to do that, but fundamentally I don't think they even think it's possible, because their estimation of like the capacity and intelligence of the average person is so low.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I'm going to share my screen again. This is an article published yesterday by my personal
Oh,
hero, my idol,
oh.
Matt Iglesias, right? And so this article, I think, speaks a lot to the contempt that you're talking about, right? So basically, the theme of this article is that Matt is mad that typical Americans think politicians are corrupt, right? And this is one of the most condescending things I think I've ever read from him. And I think this paragraph right here sums it up, right? So he's talking about, right, how Americans think that, like, politicians are corrupt because they support the interests of the elite, right? And he's saying, well, actually, voters are wrong. Sometimes the elite are right. Where is his thing here? Sophisticated people know that is not true. It's not that balancing the budget is an unsolvable problem, but involves difficult trade-offs, and reasonable people are going to disagree about those trade-offs, right? Like, he's acting like people don't understand that we don't live in a fantasy utopia where you can just get whatever you want.
Right, and
Another
you
one,
need
right?
you need experts. Like like everything to do with governance is just like is a matter of extremely like abstruse, obscure technical puzzles that only like Matt Iglesias is capable of understanding, let alone solving.
Right? Yeah. Here, that's the sympathetic view. Voters are angry because of systemic levels of corruption in the American government. This is him. I think a less generous but more accurate take would be that voters do not bother to inform themselves about the actual difficulties involved in assessing policy problems. They wrongly conclude that everything they don't like reflects corruption or self-interest behavior from elected officials. This is a crazy thing to write.
Incredible.
It is insane to write, as we're finding out day after day which members of the political class have just been texting Jeffrey Epstein and saying, like, hey, send those Russian girls over. I will also say, if people didn't follow this online, Matt Iglesias also used this opportunity to launch his sponsorship with a betting market, Poly market. So if you're going to say, like, hey, everyone else is uneducated and they need to listen to me, and not everything's motivated by financial greed and stuff, maybe don't announce that you're taking money from like something we all agree is making humanity so much worse. I like this contempt is so baffling to me. There's almost this essence, and I'm curious to bring it back to Starmer. I want you to tell me if this exists in your experience, the United Kingdom and even Canada. Is that we hear this a lot, like Kamala Harris, Matt Iglesias, the Democratic establishment won the 2024 election by getting the perfect candidate, right? And it was the voters who were wrong and picked Trump. And I find this to be, one, so condescending, and two, also something we should really be discouraging, because if that's your attitude, you're never going to win another election. Like, you can think the voters got it wrong. Democrats are spending more time complaining about the voters than they are trying to win over those voters. Is that something you see in Canada and the United Kingdom?
I mean, definitely. I mean, Canada is a bit of an outlier at the moment because we actually have, I mean, we have a centrist government that is incredibly popular at the moment for reasons that are quite specific to the Canadian context. But in Britain, there has been a whole meta discourse, and actually, just before I think we hopped on the stream, I saw there's an article somewhere like not in the Guardian, but in a major British paper where yeah, it's puzzling over why is Starmer so unpopular. Even experts like don't understand that that kind of thing. You've seen this genuine kind of head scratching from a lot of lobby journalists at Westminster and kind of the British pundit class. Like they really don't understand. It mirrors actually what we saw in the lead up to the 2024 election before Harris was the candidate. You'll remember, and you probably wrote about it at the time, at kind of the start of the year, and I think even the previous summer in 2023, there was that whole meta discourse about how the Biden economy was like the best economy ever. And there were all those pieces by like, I got a lot of criticism of the guy, but people who should know better, like Paul Krugman, or he would think would know better, just like puzzling over why don't people understand that this is the best economy ever, and like the only explanation can be that they're stupid. Otherwise they would love Joe Biden. And like uh my colleague at Jacobin, Branka Marketeach, summed it up at the time, like what was going on here. I mean, you have these people who exist in elite spaces and have bank balances that are a lot more considerable than those of the average person, and they're totally puzzled as to what's going on. Whereas like most people could just go to the grocery store and realize that things are more expensive, and that like whatever like an article in the Atlantic or the New York Times is claiming, on the basis of these kind of quite abstract macroeconomic metrics or whatever, like their life sucks. Their rent is too high. It's been getting higher. They're not paid enough. Like groceries are too expensive. Like, yeah, I mean, I don't even know how to end that thought, but I agree with you.
I also want to point out that those people were the people who were saying like Biden's economy is great were wrong, right? Speaking of Jacobin, I remember Megan Day's article called "The Split Screen Economy," I think, where she kind of broke it down and said like, yeah, like some of these metrics like GDP and stuff like that are pretty good for the Biden presidency, but because over half of the consumer spending comes from the 1%, right? All of our metrics are kind of skewed, right? So there's this artificial bump where because all this stuff is mostly averages, right? The rich are doing great. But if you take out the top 10%, we see that the economy is actually not good. And I think that kind of gets back to the point where I think these people really resent having to do politics, where their whole thing is saying, like, well, if we can get the GDP per capita up, like we won politics, we did our job. And they forget that those metrics are just that metrics, right? Metrics don't tell the whole story. They give us a good indication. But if people are coming to you and saying, like, yeah, I can't afford rent or it's getting harder to buy groceries, like that metric should take so much more priority over, the things that the economists like to tell us. And they like really resent that, I think, because it's something that, in my opinion, to do a little bit of psychoanalysis, they can't really control, right? It's very easy to say like, oh yeah, we're killing it. All the economists who agree with us on our political philosophy say we're doing great, and it's these stupid plebeians, these serfs, who are just messing it up. And it kind of sounds like that tendency crosses the Atlantic Ocean.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I mean yeah, I mean, God, what else is there? I mean, what else is there even to say about Starmer?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it mirrors. I mean, it's the exact same phenomenon. And if Harris had won and governed, in a way that was, similar to Starmer, which I think is like there's a pretty good chance that would have happened. I expect right about now, in the lead up to the midterms, with probably probably a big like a big red wave coming. yeah, we'd probably be getting you and I would be doing this stream, and we'd be talking about the like the deluge of articles in elite newspapers and magazines about like why is Kamala Harris so unpopular? It doesn't really make any sense, yeah.
Before we move off Starmer, the one thing I do want to ask you about is, how this centrist tendency differs in a parliamentary system versus in the American political system, which has, 3 branches, but for all effects and purposes is a duopoly, right? There's 2 parties, right? And so reading from your piece here, when you press American Democrats on the failures of their campaigns, the hollowness of their administration, or the contemptible concessions to the right, they invariably tell you that there was no alternative and that they had no choice. America is a center-right country. They gerrymandered the districts. We need 60 votes in the Senate. We have to think about the damn midterms. An equivalent British administration, however, has no similar rock under which to hide. With 411 of the House of Commons 650 seats, a prime minister can effectively pass any legislation they want. Through the exercise of party discipline, hardly needed anywhere in Starmer's case thanks to his regime's authoritarian and control of candidate selection, the executive branch can make or eliminate laws and regulations as it sees fit. And so I really want to hit on this because what the Democrats have been, at least for the last 30 years since Bill Clinton came into office, is this message that says, like, hey, it's us or the Republicans. And I'm a stern believer Donald Trump is not a abnormality. He is a symptom of the cause, that cause being immediate cause Republican Party, deeper cause American capitalism, discussion for another time. But this centrism, and if you listen to Matt Iglesias, Jonathan Chait, all these guys talk about it, they say we need to win the Senate, right? Unless we win the Senate in Iowa, which they have not been able to do, so I don't know why we're taking advice from them on that. Like, this can't work. So we can't get too progressive because otherwise we won't get anything done. That's not a problem in the United Kingdom, yet we still see this centrist tendency, right? What do you think that says about centrism as a whole? And then also, to a larger extent, like the American centrists who are kind of using this as like a cudgel to wield against the left.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important point because, I can't underscore enough as somebody who lives in, I live in Canada, which has a similar parliamentary system. It's modeled on the British system, the Westminster model. I mean, it really is a majoritarian kind of representative democracy, like much more so. Like the American system is uniquely obstructionist. Like the US Senate is the most undemocratic upper house in like the world, basically. It's like, I don't have the figures in front of me, but it's like the Democrats have not controlled the Senate at periods where they've had as many as 20 million more votes than the Republicans because, Rhode Island has the same number of senators as California. So, it's a system that is designed to be quite obstructionist, designed in an era before there was really a party system. And that's another conversation. But yeah, the Westminster system just doesn't work like this, right? You can get a majority government. In Starmer's case, like a massive parliamentary majority, more than 60% of the seats, with less than 34% of the popular vote in his case because of vote splitting, right? The electoral system is first past the post. So you can elect hundreds of MPs who win their constituencies by often razor thin margins. They don't get anything approaching half of the votes in the constituency, but they're the member of parliament. And then once you're the government, I mean, there is, there's probably, party discipline is exercised in the UK. There's less of it than there is in Canada where I live. But yeah, I mean, there's pretty strict party discipline. You're going to win most votes. Backbench MPs, particularly if you're Starmer and you've selected a whole bunch of former lobbyists and stuff who are loyal to you to run, and parachuted them into like former coal mining towns in Yorkshire or whatever, which is sort of the that's like the New Labour playbook. Yeah, you can legislate how you want. The kind of checks and balances, the potential for obstruction that exists in the US system, they don't really exist. So I think what that says about the arguments you hear of this kind from American centrists, like, oh, well, we would have done a public option, or we would have done Medicare for all if we'd have had 60 votes in the Senate, which, by the way, Democrats did have 60 votes in the Senate in 2009, and control of the House and a hugely popular president. You can all Google what happened. Yeah, I mean, those arguments are bullshit. You can give this style of politics a carte blanche to do whatever it wants without constraint, and they'll still govern the same way. And you don't even have to look to Britain for proof of this, because there are, I don't know how many states it is now, 10, 15 states in which there's a Democratic trifecta. And it's like, look at Rhode Island, look at California. Are these like social democratic utopias? I don't think so.
Oh, yeah, we're here in Colorado. I mean, we have Democratic control, and the legislature just vetoed a bill from some of the mountain towns that would have taxed vacant houses, right? So a lot of people in these mountain towns, a lot of rich people own ski houses, right? And they sit empty for probably 48 weeks out of the year, right? And these mountain towns wanted to tax that because they all have housing crisis, because abundance doesn't really work here because you physically cannot build more houses, right? You're in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. And the Colorado legislature vetoed that. And, some of these mountain towns were saying, like, we need this tax to help support some of the services for the low wage workers who make these ski towns run, the bartenders, the waiters, ski instructors, stuff like that. And so that centrism argument has never really, been persuasive to me. Also, like, these people say, like, oh, well, we can't do left-wing policies because we need to win, and then spend the rest of their time arguing against left-wing policies, right? So I'm not surprised to hear that it's a similar dynamic in Britain, even though they don't have this. One thing I will say is, if you're in the chat, we got about 500 people now. So
Nice.
yeah, start dropping in some questions. If you guys have any, we can take those. Before we pivot there, Luke, I want to ask you, like, kind of the unspoken fear. Actually, that's not true. The spoken fear behind all, let's call it mid-Atlantic politics at this point, is the rise of the far right. Donald Trump, specifically leading this movement, but there are fascists, neo-fascists, whatever you want to call them, across Europe and throughout the world, right? Mm-hmm. And centrism is based on this argument of stopping that, right? Again, going back to that electability. If you hate JD Vance, you have to swear a blood oath to Gavin Newsom a year before he even announces his campaign. And what we're seeing in the United Kingdom, at least in my opinion, is that centrism is growing the far right, right? And to put it specifically, as this Labour government is failing, reform is getting more popular. Reform has a nice sounding name, right? All these parties do. Yeah, right. America First. It's really a very, in my opinion, vicious, Islamophobic, anti-immigrant, Nazi-adjacent far-right party, right? So can you tell us a little bit about the rise of reform, and then also, how, if you've seen anything from them, how are the centrists who are saying we're the only ones who can stop the far right squaring the circle when their failure is directly driving people to the far right?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty extraordinary. I mean, yeah, for those who don't follow British politics, I mean, Reform is it's kind of the successor to UKIP, which was the United Kingdom Independence Party, which was I mean, not a single issue party, but it was, they never elected any MPs. They had one MP who defected from the Conservatives, Douglas Carswell. They elected members of the European Parliament, and I think would often get the most votes in EU elections because they were like the anti-EU party. But Nigel Farage, the leader of UKIP and now the leader of Reform, he has been one of the most consequential British politicians of this century, despite the fact that it was only in 2024 that he finally won a seat. He lost so many elections before. It was because of UKIP that David Cameron, former Tory Prime Minister, did the Brexit vote. Like, that was supposed to be a move. Brexit was going to be defeated. They were going to stave off Reform. backfired massively, of course. And yeah, reform sort of, it emerged kind of from the ashes of the Tory party, which has self-immolated, 4 prime ministers in 3 years or something. I mean, just an unmitigated disaster after they were, they'd been in power since 2010. So a lot of accrued fatigue from that as well. And yeah, I mean, reform, it's capturing, I think for a lot of people, it's not exactly encoded as far right, even though it is. As you said, like reform is just a nice sounding, like it sounds kind of like we want to fix things, we're against corruption. It's sort of a free floating political signifier. So I think reform's been able to gain a lot of ground for that reason, and they are, in the lead in many polls, kind of in the low 30s at the moment in the UK. But the Starmer government, so much of what they have done, so many of the most right-wing things, particularly around immigration, law and order, these kinds of things, and it's been a very repressive and authoritarian government. They have been about trying to win back these idealized kind of reform voters in the north of England, especially, who might be in former Labour heartlands, but who in many cases, I think it's unlikely ever voted Labour in the first place. Like often these are Tory voters or they're former non-voters. The reform project may still implode. It has a lot of incoherence. I don't think it's particularly well organized. It's kind of a personality cult. But so much of what the Starmer government has done has been to kind of implement parts of reform's agenda and Farage's agenda, and sort of said, well, we have to do this to fight reform. We're the only thing protecting like cosmopolitan, liberalism in the UK. But also the out of the other side of their mouth, they're kind of saying, well, it's like, well, we have to deport all these migrants because otherwise reform might win and deport migrants. I mean, it's all very incoherent.
That's the Diet Pepsi thesis, right? Where it's like, why would someone who wants Pepsi choose Diet Pepsi, right? If somebody wants to deport immigrants, they're going with the guy who's going to deport immigrants, right?
Uh-huh.
It is so wild to hear that the United Kingdom has its own version of the Liz Cheney voter, where it's like, oh yeah, these people, there's just this whole swath of the country who isn't voting for any party because they're like perfectly in the middle of every poll tested. I don't think how many times are people going to cling to this before they realize this does not work? That was Kamala Harris' entire philosophy. And she got less Republican votes than Joe Biden, right? I don't know.
This is, I guess, but before we get to the questions, I mean, this was a point that I think you made very well in your piece when you were arguing with Adam Jendelson and Jonathan Chait. I mean, essentially they have a view of politics, an understanding of politics that's kind of unfalsifiable, because if they get the candidate who, at the time anyway, with Kamala Harris, they were saying was this great, perfect centrist candidate. Iglesias said he liked the Democratic convention almost too much, right? Chait's piece was like, the centrism is working or whatever. They get their perfect candidate and still lose. They will always just say, well, there wasn't enough triangulation. Chait, in responding to you, said something like, oh, can't you just understand? It was like the right medicine, but the dose was too small. And so it's like, okay, well, if that's the logic, then there's centrism can't lose. It can't fail. It can only be failed, right?
Yeah. Here, I'll pull that up. For people who didn't know this, I spent my weekend arguing with the Atlantic staff writer and John Fetterman's former chief of staff. And then I watched the Patriots lose the Super Bowl. So that was not a fun weekend. Yeah, I know everyone else hates the Patriots, but I'm
are you a Patriots guy? Oh dear. I didn't know I was on the stream with someone so reactionary.
I know. Yeah. That's how we trick you. Actually, it's funny. There was a poll the other day where Patriots are Republican coded because Robert Kraft is a pedophile and a huge Zionist. But they actually, besides the Green Bay Packers, they have the least amount of Republicans on their team. So
interesting.
But basically, here's just what we're talking about, right? This is me with Chait, right? So you admit Harris moderated what he wanted, but it didn't work. And he's saying, no, her moderation did work, but she didn't do it enough, right? So basically, the only way this is true is if you accept that Jonathan Chait can't be wrong, right? Like that, and this is what you're talking about here. I assume the medicine worked, but that dose was too small is a concept they're capable of understanding. They can't be so simple-minded as to only grasp the medicine worked, didn't work. So one, being called simple-minded by Jonathan Chait, I'm going to wear that badge of honor for the rest of my life. And two, this goes back to what we were saying, like to use this analogy, the dose was too small. Jonathan Chait and all his friends were the doctors who prescribed this dose, right? So they're getting back to this fact where the only way this philosophy works is if, they can never be wrong. And I think this graph kind of like helps. I kind of charted this up. So this is Harris's favorability from 2024, right? July is when, there starts to be rumors that Biden might drop out. People are starting to, kind of grow on her. This is where she becomes the nominee. Her favorability skyrockets during the convention. Here, in my opinion, she was not really like telling people what her policies were going to be. I think a generous reading would be, she was keeping her cards close to the chest. I think a more accurate reading would be that she's not the type of person to come up with policies on her own, but rather let people tell her what to think. And then her popularity peaks right before the convention. This is the convention that you mentioned Iglesias loved too much. And he actually called this the start of the Kamala Harris era, right? He was so convinced she was going to win. People didn't like what they saw. It falls down. This is where Jonathan Chait says that centrism is working, when she has been falling from her peak of favorability since then, here. And then it just gets lower and lower, and she loses on election day. So that's kind of like the type of intellectuals we're dealing with here. And I think it just goes back to your thought of like, what'd you say? Centrism cannot fail. It can only be failed, right? Again, we did our job. The voters fucked up, right? Yeah.
Now, I can't see the questions, but I'm assuming we've got some.
Yeah, we got some. First one, what exactly makes Donald Trump a fascist? How do you define fascism? I think this is a response to me. I'll give my definition. Luke, let me know if you disagree. My definition of fascism really comes from this essay written by Umberto Eco, who grew up under Mussolini. It's called Fascism. And basically his theory is that, fascism, unlike other political ideologies, is more bullshitty, right? It's always kind of nebulous. I think a lot about how, Mussolini started his campaign as like an atheist and saying like, if God is real, he will strike me down right now. A couple of years later, he's marching on Rome and having his soldiers' weapons blessed by the Pope, right? So like, I hear a lot of American conservatives say like, we're not close to the Nazis because the Nazis hated Christianity and we're Christians. That's not typically true. And also, I don't think that's disqualifying. So Umberto Eco's kind of theory of fascism is that fascism is a set of characteristics, right? And that there's different ones that are present in different types of fascism. Thinking a lot about pseudo-populism, he calls it, right? We see that a lot with Donald Trump, right? I'm going to, cut credit card interest rates. He never does it. One I really like is the description of the enemy, in which the enemy of the fascist is both weak and strong. So if you think about how Donald Trump talks about liberals, right? They'll say like, these soy boy beta cucks in their metropolitan areas, like we could kill them all. But also at the same time, they're stealing all the elections. They're diehard Stalinist communists who are telling us what to say, and they're going to kill us all, right? So it's kind of this fluctuation between, one, don't worry, guys, we can kill all these weak guys, but also like we have to band together and be strong men. There's a lot in his essay, which I'll share later on, a rejection of traditionalism rejecting modernism, right? So if you think about, it's kind of cliche at this point, but Donald Trump, his administration is pretty anti-science, to use a cliche term, right? They kind of hate this stuff. A lot of the stuff I think about gender is a reaction to a modern understanding of gender, where it's like, hey, gender and sex are actually different. They can move back and forth, stuff like that. So I believe that Donald Trump satisfies these characteristics in a way that actually links him. And I think this is a good way to view fascism, because even if we look at, European 20th century fascists, like they had a lot of disagreements, right? Mussolini and Hitler had different ideas about like religion, stuff like that. You look at Francisco Franco, whose fascism, called Phalangism, really came out of Roman Catholicism, right? That's not what we see from Hitler. His more comes from a German ideology, which kind of brought in a little bit of Aryan mysticism and pseudo North mythology in some ways, right? So that's my definition. Yeah, I'm not sure how you feel about that, Luke.
I won't say too much on this because I don't want to take us into the the always tricky fascism debate. But yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to I'm not going to tell anybody don't call Donald Trump a fascist, right? I mean, I've actually spent I spent a lot of last year reading about Nazi Germany. I made my way through the Richard Evans Third Reich trilogy, which I'd really recommend. Very readable history if anyone's interested in that period. I mean, I'm not sure what term I would use for the modern authoritarian right, but it does strike me that a lot of the kind of key conditions for how fascism germinated in the 1930s aren't really present now. And so sometimes I wonder, it's like I'll use fascism as like a term of abuse for Donald Trump or as a pejorative, but like if I'm wearing my historian goggles, it's like fascism in Italy and in Germany is not in Spain, which is interesting. Actually, that's not true. Maybe in Spain. Spain's obviously doesn't fight in the First or Second World War, but has a civil war in the 1930s. In Germany and Italy, the experience of total war is absolutely central to the formation of fascism. You have huge casualties. You have in Germany the sort of myth of the backstabbing by the Social Democrats. You have all of these veterans who come back, some of whom actually become socialists and communists, but others who form, the Freikorps units and become, the cadre of, the Third Reich and later the Brown Shirts and the SS. America doesn't really have that. Obviously, America has been at war basically every year since 1945, but it's not really the same. It's not experienced the same kind of casualties. I also don't think Trumpism is more a form of mass politics than like the Republican Party was prior, but I don't think it's a form of mass politics in the way that like Mussolini's or Hitler's movements were. But anyway, like a lot of this is sort of an academic debate, I think. If you want to call Trump a fascist, go ahead. I don't care.
Yeah. I will say, I always think it's funny, like, and you mentioned, and I think you're right that there's something to say of like the post-World War I environment and how that leads to fascism is like, whether we call these guys fascists or not, like at least in Europe, like, the fascists in the Freikorps were like battle-hardened World War I veterans who had their brains broken by mustard gas and artillery bombs. And like the guys in ICE are like, got mad because they put too many black women in Star Wars, like that's like definitely a difference. This one is let's see, how do we build a collective movement with simple goals when divisive propaganda through social media is so pervasive and powerful? Do you want to take a crack at that one?
Tell people to log off. I mean, no, I mean it's a real question. I mean, we are I was just talking about how the conditions are different when it comes to fascism in the 1930s. Conditions for left-wing organizing are very different too, because we're dealing with a much more atomized environment, right? Like workplaces are much different than they used to be. I mean, it's like when we think about a workplace, I mean, it's obviously a huge generalization. Think about a workplace in the 30s. We're probably thinking about like a factory where there's like huge numbers of workers like assembled in a room or on an assembly line or in a warehouse. And like the boundaries between labor and capital are kind of rendered visible like by the actual like physical layout of the workspace. And what do we think of like since the 1990s, if we're thinking about a workspace, workplace, we're thinking about again, a huge generalization, but it might be symbolized by like a cubicle, right? Like, and a cubicle is like we're literally cordoned off from one another in a space, like from our co-workers. We're literally like atomized little units. And like increasingly, you don't even have, like, even that's outdated, because so many people have email jobs, right? Like they're not even going into workplaces. Yeah, the conditions are very different, and that does pose some unique challenges. I don't know. I just described what all the problems are, so now I guess you can tell us what the solutions are.
Yeah, my theory on this, right, is I think Joe, who asked this, right, you're correct, right? Um, Social media is so divisive, so pervasive, and I think there's almost an opportunity that because it's so bad that people are a little bit more looking to get offline, right? I tell anytime I talk to people in other DSA chapters, I am constantly encouraging them like meet up. Don't just do Zoom
Yeah.
meetings, like meet up, talk to each other. We get more people coming out for a picket line than are in our entire labor committee because I think people actually know, like, hey, I spend all time online. You know, there's like an icky hangover feeling when I spend too much time on Twitter where I'm
Yes.
like, oh my God, I can feel my brain is like chemically changing, right? And I think people know that. They also know that, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk are manipulating their algorithm, showing them what they want to see, all that stuff. And so I think if you can lean into that and kind of point out, like, guys, let's get offline. Like, let's just, something as simple as, left wing organizing does not have to be like we're marching on the Bastille, right? It can be like, let's go meet our neighbors, right? Hey guys, we're having a picnic in the park on this day. We're going to set up a volleyball tent. Come through if you want, whatever that is, right? And people, I think, respond and are excited to actually meet people. And in my experience, like, the time I spend online making my brain icky, and I am way too online, right? I get the opposite feeling when I get to meet other people at a protest or a picket line or even like a DSA meeting because I am seeing, like, thank God I'm not alone. Not all of my politics has to be like combative online, and that there are other people with me. And so I would encourage people to really kind of lean in and accept social media fucking sucks, and that you can actually in a political way like organize against it, right? I'm not saying don't go on social media, do whatever you want, but I think people are really tired of social media companies manipulating us, tricking us, anything like that. Soul in here says my reading group met up for dinner the other day. It was so fun. Yeah, stuff like that, right? It does not have to be huge. I think one of the underreported stories of this era is how non-political groups are organizing, right? I read a story about in Minneapolis, there was a morning running group who they were running, they saw ICE vehicles, and they set up an alert system where they would flag people to ICE vehicles on their runs. That became one of the most effective ways for ICE location and stuff like that. So don't think that everything has to be limited to online. And really, everybody kind of hates social media the same. So use that to your advantage. There was one more in here, and we're coming up on our hour. So Luke, I'll leave this one for you. You spoke a little bit about how Canada has Canada's centrist government is popular for Canadian specific reasons. Why is that? I assume that's because Donald Trump was like, we're going to invade Canada and we're meeting with Albertan separatists. But, I'd love to hear from the expert.
Yeah, I mean, so up until our federal election, our last federal election was in April of 2025, and up until the beginning of last January, so January of 2025, it seemed like the election was going to be one thing. It was going to be an election fought around the cost of living. Justin Trudeau, prime minister since 2015, was going to lead the Liberal Party. He'd become very unpopular. The Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre had been ahead in the polls by double digits for the last at least 2 years. And it was possible that the NDP, our social democratic kind of traditional third party, was going to, the Liberals are going to collapse. And, the NDP's strategy was like, we're going to try to make this a two-way race between us and the Conservatives. But then Kamala Harris lost to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump, as you said, Joe, started threatening Canada. And there was, a kind of a domino effect. Justin Trudeau was kind of, coerced, soft pushed out. And, Mark Carney, a figure who'd never held elected office before, became Liberal leader. And so the Liberals were in this, this, pretty unique circumstances, pretty advantageous conditions where they've been the government for 10 years. And yet they have this new figure who is, kind of, like a tabula rasa, sort of unformed in the public mind, even less well-formed than Kamala Harris was in that, stretch of her, polling surge that you had on screen before. Carney, I think, played his hand pretty well. He understood that there was a feeling of sort of civic nationalism in Canada that Trump's threats had sort of inspired, and he was able to just kind of ride that wave. And neither the Conservatives nor the NDP were really able to adapt. The Conservatives actually did have a pretty good election. They got over 40% of the popular vote. They gained some seats, but I mean, they blew a 25-point lead. And Pierre Poilievre, who thought, until a few weeks before, thought he was going to be prime minister, lost the seat that he'd represent, that he'd held in Ottawa for since the early 2000s. So everything in Canada right now in domestic politics here is just downstream from Donald Trump. So much is just a reaction to Donald Trump. And I think Mark Carney, by virtue of projecting a certain, aura of competency and calm and sort of defiance of Donald Trump, has been able to really capitalize on the moment. And so much so that I think most people have not really registered that a lot of his agenda is pretty right-wing, which is a whole other conversation. He is a savvier operator than a Keir Starmer or a Kamala Harris. Even if he kind of has, he's a product of elite institutions and in some ways functionally has very similar politics.
Yeah, it definitely seems like Canada's in almost like a popular front, like literally rally around the flag and defend it against the Americans period. So
definitely
it'll be interesting to see how that works out. I apologize. I said that was our last question. I have one question for you about Mark Carney. A little bit different than what we talked about today. It kind of just came to me, at Davos, Mark Carney stood on the stage and said, the post-World War II order is over, right? Basically not really naming Trump, but saying the Americans have lost their shit. They're crazy. We all have our reserve currency as the American dollar. We can't really rely on this system anymore. One, I want to know, why do you think that came from a Canadian as opposed to a European, right? And then two, why Mark Carney? Because like you said, he came from these elite institutions. I believe he was he a Goldman Sachs or
Goldman Sachs for 13 years. He was what's it called? Brookfield Asset Management vice president. He was also a sort of activist, if that's the word, in the corporate world around environmental issues, such as that's a real thing that you can do, which it's not really. And he was a central banker as well. So he was governor of the Bank of Canada, and then after he governor of the Bank of England. The question of why him and not the Europeans. I mean, the only other European, the only other candidate I can think of who might have given a speech like this, who's European, would be somebody like Macron. I mean, because he's, France has its own kind of specific orientation towards the rest of Europe. It's a former imperial power. It likes to think it's a world power still. So Macron might have given a speech like this, but he's kind of a dead duck. He's kind of a lame duck. I don't even know what the status of I don't know what's going on in the French National Assembly right now, but it's they haven't really been able to no party has been able to really hold on to power. They've had so many prime ministers over the last year and a half. Carney, I do think Carney is a savvier operator than some of these people. I also think the fact that it was him who said it gave the speech an added resonance it might not have had otherwise. Which, by the way, we are over an hour, but I'm not in any rush, so we can talk for a little bit more if you want. But yeah, I mean, in my piece on Carney's speech, the way I explained it is it's kind of an only Nixon could go to China logic, right? Mark Carney is a former banker. He's someone who'd spoken at Davos many, many times, and feels very comfortable speaking there. So the fact that it was him saying all of this, I think, made people go, well, if this guy is repudiating, the rules-based international order, like he must be right. Right. So I think there was a lot of that in it. I think he understood as well that there was like in a kind of almost non-political or not non-political, non-ideological way. I think he understood that there's a craving throughout a lot of the world, and particularly the West and the English-speaking West in particular. There's a craving because of what Trump is doing, geopolitically, especially, where his administration is just saying our foreign policy is just the law of the jungle now, right? We're just shaking down, we're the most powerful country in the world. We can do what we want. We're gonna kidnap the president of Venezuela and his wife, and we're gonna invoke American domestic law as our means of legitimation.
For owning a gun.
For owning, gun owners. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
So the NRA is going to defend Nicolas Maduro.
Yeah. NRA, welcome to the resistance. But yeah. So as all of that's going on, right? I think Carney understood there's a craving for just some aura of statesmanship, some idea that there can be some other geopolitics doesn't have to be the law of the jungle. It can be something else. And just the way he gave the speech, the kind of register it was pitched in, where it's this language of kind of statesmanship and statecraft. I think people are really craving that in a kind of pan ideological way. And I think that's kind of one reason that the speech resonated. It's also another reason why I think people paid less attention to the content of the second half of it than they did to the kind of rather striking stuff he said at the beginning.
Yeah. Mark, he everything after this is kind of obsolete, but just curious, do you think that, and I'm mostly curious about Europe, do you think Europe is going to take that to heart? I know we've seen some countries start to divest their bonds from, American treasuries and stuff like that. The big thing I kind of take about whether or not Europe will take this seriously is their defense spending, right? Are they going to start to increase their defense spending, thinking that, Trump is not going to honor Article 5 of NATO, right? If Vladimir Putin sends a missile into Poland, right? They're not expecting the Americans to show up, which, to be honest, they probably shouldn't expect the Americans to show up. But I'm curious, do you think they took this to heart? Do you think they're kind of still in a denial stage? Yeah. Anything in that world?
Well, the easy part of the question to answer is the military spending part. I mean, they're going to massively increase their military expenditure. And Canada's doing that, right? Carney's trying to raise Canada's military expenditure to 5% of GDP by 2030, which in proportion to the size of Canada's economy would be that's spending more as a proportion of GDP, I believe, than the United States even spends on its military. It would be trillions and trillions of dollars. It's absolutely unprecedented in the Canadian context. So I think the Europeans are going to do that. And I don't know if the phrase German rearmament doesn't make you anxious, I don't know what would, but it's coming. And a lot of the people pushing it are the Greens. It's the center left as well as the center right.
Oh, really?
That's pushing it. Yeah. I mean, it's very, it started under the previous German government before the center right came back in last year. The Greens, I think, had the foreign ministry, and they were part of the ones pushing all the rearmament and stuff. It's kind of wild. But I mean, when it comes to Europeans, the Europeans' reaction to Carney's speech, I mean, I can't say I've seen anything yet that would suggest that they really are taking those words to heart. But furthermore, it's I'm not really sure that Carney's government is taking, its own words to heart, the prime minister's own words to heart, because, they haven't said anything about Cuba, for example. I mean, we're waiting. There is there's a fair bit of, activism in Canada trying to get the government to do something around Cuba. Canada historically has had pretty good relations with Cuba. In the 1960s, even like Pierre Trudeau, a liberal prime minister, by no means a radical. Like he just went to Cuba. He was like pals with Castro. So, maybe we'll get some movement there. I'm not holding my breath. Israel desecrated a war cemetery in Gaza. I'm not sure on what grounds. Again, like Hamas tunnels underneath it or some stupid pretext like that. Like
the dead bodies were Hamas. Yeah,
yeah.
Hamas
I mean,
was
like
raising zombies to
war
attack
dead of Australian and Canadian and British troops.
That's
And
so shitty.
it's
Oh my
crazy.
God.
And the government put out the most limp, statement about we're very concerned about, what's happened in the cemetery, didn't say by who, et cetera, et cetera. There's if you're a Canadian prime minister, I think because Canada is, I mean, it's it's a G7 country. It's very prosperous. Its economy is pretty large in global terms, but there's only 40 million of us, right? And so it's a small country, and if you go and make a big speech on the international stage and it's received well there, like often what will happen is the Canadian reception of the speech will be a reaction to the international reaction to it, because like we're not used to getting that kind of attention. So like any attention is good attention. It's like when Justin Trudeau was on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine, that was like a 3-day news story in Canada, right?
Wow.
Like people couldn't believe it. So much so that people didn't even notice all the insane things he actually said in the interview that went, that cover was advertising. But yeah, like the real test of Carneyism, and I mean, I said this on in my piece on the speech, the test of Carneyism over the next few months is to see like, to what extent did they, did they really sort of live by what Carney said? Because I think they are embracing the idea that the so-called rules-based international order is dead. And to Carney's credit, he didn't really say like it's dead. He said it's never been alive to begin with. It's always been kind of fraudulent. But I mean, there's two possible conclusions that you could take from that, right? Like one is, it's dead, so we need to build new global alliances if we want to preserve the post-war settlement, represented by things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or preserve is the wrong word, but we want to make actual those principles. Or you could conclude, well, we don't even have to pretend when we make trade deals or when we form new bilateral partnerships. We don't have to pretend that there are like humanistic principles at work here, because the liberal order is dead. So why would we pretend? So that's why we're going to do like an arms deal with Qatar or the United Arab Emirates or whatever. So yeah, and I feel like there is probably more a chance that they will be moving in that direction. We'll see, but I'm not holding my breath.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, I think the whole I did appreciate Carney's speech, and like you said, to give him credit, he wasn't like everything has been perfect up to now, and we had human rights and democracy, and now it all went away in 8 months, right? But I think kind of like what really left a sour taste in my mouth was Israel commits genocide in Palestine, right? America starving Cuba. America coups the Venezuelan government. And then when Donald Trump threatens to invade Greenland and, says, I guess this actually came after the speech, but I'm pretty sure he called all the British troops who fought in Afghanistan as like, what did he say? He's like, they didn't go to the front lines or something like that. Which pissed off Starmer. Like, there's definitely like a Eurocentric, like, oh, now this is affecting us, so now we have to speak out about it, right?
Absolutely. Like that is the straw that broke the camel's back. Like it wasn't that the liberal international order, so-called, in scare quotes, had been like its principles had been like violated so many times when it came to the Palestinians or so many other contexts. It's like the International Criminal Court had like mostly or exclusively prosecuted cases from like Africa and Asia, right? Like like they weren't prosecuting Tony Blair over the war in Iraq, but then all of a sudden Trump started applying that logic to other NATO countries, like Greenland, which is autonomous semi-autonomous Danish territory, and like Canada, which is the United States' closest ally and biggest trading partner. It's like I think over $1 billion a day of goods go back and forth. Like our economies are so tightly integrated. Yeah, I mean, Trump applying that logic to NATO countries is really what was probably one of the main catalysts for the speech. It does, thinking about it, it does, it does, like, there are some interesting hypotheticals here, right? It's like, if Trump invaded Greenland and then Denmark invoked Article 5 of the NATO Charter, I mean, NATO command is in the United States. So does that mean all the other NATO countries go to war against the United States? Like, if Canada was invaded by the United States, would like Britain and France declare war on the United States? I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like, and I feel like, again, NATO has had this problem for a long time because, to my knowledge, Turkey and Greece still quabble over the occupation of Cyprus, and they're
Yes.
both NATO countries, right? So, like,
And
it's one of
Turkey
those things.
has been critical of Israel over Palestine as well. And so, like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's like, what would happen if somehow, I mean, like, God forbid, but if somehow like an IDF jet and like the Turkish military like had some kind of altercation in the sky? What happens if they both invoke Article 5?
yeah, it's one of those things, and I honestly think this is all downstream of the fact that, like, NATO was supposed to combat, the Soviet Union, and now the Soviet Union is gone. So it's kind of like, who's our enemy? And the Americans have said, like, oh, that's Putin and Russia, and the Europeans have gone along with that because of, the invasion of Ukraine, which is understandable. But, like, not every country's biggest problem is, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? So, like, they're all kind of like looking elsewhere, in my opinion, which I think is trying to make this, fall away. It would make for an absolutely crazy story if, like, in the next World War, like, Cuba, Venezuela, Denmark, and NATO versus the United States, Argentina, and Israel. Like, that would be, they'd make Call of Duty video games about that for so long. And, there's certainly some interesting dynamics, but fingers crossed it doesn't come to that. But yeah. Cool, Luke. I've held you way longer than I told you I was going to hold you. Thank you so much for your time. Why don't you tell the people, we've got about 530 still with us. So tell the people, where they can find you.
Sure. Well, thanks everyone so much for tuning in. I'm sure we'll do this again at some point. I am on Substack at Luke W Savage. You can find me there. I'm also on Twitter under the same, the artist formerly known as Twitter, under the under the same handle, Luke W Savage. And I have a podcast called Michael and Us, which you could find on SoundCloud, Spotify, an app near you, patreon.com/Michael and Us. So plenty more delicious Luke Savage content out there for y'all.
Yeah. I highly suggest everybody go subscribe, follow. I've been listening to Michael and Us and, following your work, mainly at Jacobin since I ever started writing about politics. So
cheers.
Super cool for me to get to, talk with you today. So everyone go check that out, subscribe, and we'll let you guys know next time we do this. Take care.
All right. Cheers.
Bye-bye.